The bullet that grazed Thomas Whitfield's shoulder in a dusty Fort Sumner saloon on a scorching July afternoon in 1878 wasn't what changed his life. It was the woman who stepped between him and the next shot that did. Thomas had been minding his own business, nursing a whiskey at the bar after 3 weeks of driving cattle from Texas up through New Mexico territory. His muscles ached from long days in the saddle, and his only plan was to wash the trail dust from his throat before finding a bed that didn't move beneath him. The argument started at a poker table behind him, voices rising over accusations of cheating. Thomas barely glanced over his shoulder before the first shot rang out. The bullet tore through the sleeve of his shirt, burning a line across his skin. He spun around, reaching for his gun, but before the shooter could aim again, a woman in a deep green dress stepped directly into the line of fire. She held up both hands, her voice cutting through the chaos with unexpected authority. "That's enough. Put the gun down, Marcus, or I'll have Sheriff Garrett here before you can blink." The man with the gun, a rangy fellow with wild eyes and wilder hair, hesitated. His hand trembled, but he didn't lower his weapon. Thomas could see the situation teetering on a knife's edge. He slowly moved his hand away from his own gun, not wanting to escalate things with the woman standing exposed. "Miss Olivia," the bartender called out nervously. "Step aside now." But Olivia Winters didn't move. She stood her ground, staring down the armed man with a steadiness that made Thomas's heart pound for entirely different reasons than the near miss with death. She was tall for a woman, with dark hair pinned up in a practical style and eyes that flashed with determination in the dim saloon light. "Marcus, your quarrel isn't with everyone in this establishment. You think Hank cheated you. Take it up with him outside, not with bullets flying where innocent people are drinking." Something in her voice, a combination of firmness and genuine concern, seemed to penetrate the man's rage. His gun hand slowly lowered. "He took my money. And shooting up the place will get you hanged, not your money back." Olivia's tone softened slightly. "Put the gun away. Go sleep it off." Marcus looked around the saloon as if suddenly realizing where he was and what he'd done. He shoved his gun into his holster and stumbled toward the door, muttering curses under his breath. The moment he disappeared into the street, the tension broke. Conversations resumed, though more quietly, and the piano player returned to his keys. Thomas pressed a hand to his bleeding shoulder, and only then did Olivia turn to look at him. Her eyes widened slightly as she saw the blood seeping between his fingers. "You're hurt. Come with me." She didn't wait for his agreement, just grabbed his other arm and pulled him toward a back door. Thomas found himself following without protest, curious about this woman who faced down armed men without flinching. She led him through the door into a small office, clearly belonging to whoever ran the saloon. A desk stood against one wall, papers scattered across its surface, and a wash basin sat on a stand near the window. Olivia immediately began rolling up her sleeves. "Sit down," she ordered, pointing to a chair. Thomas complied, studying her as she poured water from a pitcher into the basin. "You always make a habit of stepping in front of bullets. You always make a habit of getting shot at in saloons," she countered, bringing the basin over and setting it on the desk beside him. "First time, actually. I generally avoid trouble." "Well, you picked the wrong day to visit Fort Sumner." She began unbuttoning his shirt with practiced efficiency, her fingers quick and sure. Thomas felt heat rise in his face that had nothing to do with the wound. "I'm obliged for your help, Miss Winters, Olivia Winters, and don't mention it." She peeled back his shirt to examine the wound, her expression focused. "You're lucky. It's not deep, just a graze, but it needs cleaning." When she pressed a wet cloth to the wound, Thomas hissed through his teeth at the sting. Olivia didn't apologize, just continued cleaning with gentle efficiency. He watched her work, noting the calluses on her hands, the determined set of her jaw, the way her brow furrowed in concentration. "You a nurse?" he asked. "I run the boarding house 2 streets over." "You learn to patch up injuries when you're housing cowboys, prospectors, and drifters." She glanced up at him briefly. "What's your name?" "Thomas Whitfield. Most people call me Thomas." "Well, Thomas, you'll need to keep this clean. Change the bandage daily." She was wrapping strips of clean cloth around his shoulder now, her hands warm against his skin. "I appreciate it. How much do I owe you?" Olivia tied off the bandage and stepped back, wiping her hands on a towel. "Nothing. I couldn't very well let you bleed all over the floor." Thomas stood, testing his shoulder. It hurt, but the bleeding had stopped. "At least let me buy you dinner, as a thank you." For the first time he saw her hesitate. She looked at him more carefully now, taking in his weathered face, the honest look in his eyes, the respectful way he stood without crowding her space. "I don't know you. That's generally why people have dinner together, to get acquainted." He offered a small smile. "I promise I'm better company when I'm not being shot at." The corners of her mouth twitched upward. "There's a restaurant down the street, Rosa's. I'll meet you there at 7, but I'm paying for my own meal." "Fair enough." She brushed past him to the door, then paused and looked back. "And Thomas, get that shirt cleaned. You're still bleeding on it." Then she was gone, leaving Thomas standing in the small office with his heart beating faster than it had during the shooting. He looked down at his ruined shirt and couldn't help but smile. The restaurant was small but clean, with red checkered tablecloths, and the smell of spices and roasting meat hanging heavy in the air. Thomas arrived early, having cleaned up as best he could at the public bathhouse and changed into his only other shirt. His shoulder throbbed, but he barely noticed it. Olivia arrived exactly at 7, wearing the same green dress but with her hair down now, falling in dark waves past her shoulders. She looked younger like this, and Thomas found himself wondering about her age. Mid-20s, he guessed, maybe a bit younger. He was 28 himself, though some days the hard years of ranch work made him feel older. "You clean up well," Olivia said as she sat down across from him. "So do you, though you looked pretty good covered in my blood too." She laughed, a genuine sound that lit up her face. "You're a strange man, Thomas Whitfield." They ordered food, simple fare of beef and potatoes, and as they waited, Thomas asked, "How does a woman end up running a boarding house in Fort Sumner?" Olivia's expression grew more guarded. "That's a long story. I've got time." She studied him for a moment, then seemed to make a decision. "My father owned a ranch about 20 miles from here. Died 3 years ago during a drought. Left debts I couldn't pay. Lost the ranch to the bank, took what little money was left and opened the boarding house. I'm sorry about your father. He was a good man, taught me to shoot, ride, and stand up for myself. That last part has come in handy more times than I can count." She took a sip of water. "What about you?" "What brings a cattle driver to Fort Sumner? End of a trail drive. We brought a herd up from Texas for a rancher named Henderson. He's got land north of here. I was hired on just for the drive." "So you'll be moving on soon." Thomas found he didn't like that idea as much as he usually did. He was a drifter by nature, never staying in one place long, always looking for the next job. But something about Olivia made him want to reconsider that lifestyle. Maybe. Maybe not. Depends on whether there's reason to stay. Their food arrived, interrupting the moment, but Thomas caught the slight color that rose in Olivia's cheeks. They ate and talked, the conversation flowing easily between them. She told him about the challenges of running a business as a single woman, the way some men refused to take her seriously, the satisfaction of proving them wrong. He told her about growing up on a small farm in Missouri, losing his parents to fever when he was 19, the years of wandering that followed. "You ever want to settle down?" Olivia asked as they finished their meal. Thomas considered the question carefully. "I used to think I wasn't the settling type, but lately, I've been thinking maybe I just hadn't found the right place, or the right reason." Olivia met his eyes and something passed between them, an understanding that went deeper than words. But before either could speak, the restaurant door burst open and a young boy ran in, breathless and wide-eyed. "Miss Olivia, you need to come quick. There's trouble at the boarding house." Olivia was on her feet immediately, Thomas right behind her. They ran through the darkening streets, the boy leading the way. As they approached the boarding house, a two-story wooden structure with a wide porch, Thomas could see a crowd gathering. Raised voices carried through the evening air. The scene that greeted them was chaos. A man Thomas recognized as one of the cowboys from his own trail crew was arguing loudly with another man, both of them drunk and belligerent. Other boarders had come out onto the porch to watch, and a few townspeople had stopped to see the commotion. "What's going on here?" Olivia demanded, pushing through the crowd. "He stole my watch," the cowboy, a man named Jake, shouted. "I left it on the table and now it's gone." "I didn't touch your damn watch," the other man yelled back. Olivia held up her hands. "Both of you quiet down." "Jake, when did you last see your watch?" "This morning before I went out. I left it right on the table in my room." "And you're sure you didn't move it? Maybe put it in a pocket?" Jake's face reddened. "I'm not stupid, Miss Olivia. I know where I left it." Thomas stepped forward. "Jake, let me check your things. Sometimes items get mixed up. I'm telling you, it's not there. He took it." Jake pointed an accusing finger at the other man. The situation was deteriorating rapidly. Thomas could see Olivia thinking, trying to find a way to diffuse things before they turned violent. He admired her calm in the face of chaos, the way she didn't back down even when faced with angry, drunk men. "Everyone inside now," Olivia said firmly. "Jake, you and Thomas go to your room. Look again. Everyone else, this show is over. Get back to your business." Reluctantly, the crowd began to disperse. Thomas followed Jake up to his room on the second floor, a small space with a narrow bed, a table, and a trunk for belongings. Jake immediately began rummaging through his things, muttering angrily. Thomas looked around more carefully, checking under the bed, behind the furniture. His eyes caught something glinting in the gap between the wall and the table. He reached down and pulled out a silver pocket watch on a chain. "This what you're looking for?" Jake spun around, his face going from anger to sheepishness in seconds. "How did it get there?" "Probably fell off the table, rolled into the crack. Easy to miss if you weren't looking carefully." Thomas handed him the watch, and Jake had the grace to look embarrassed. "I guess I should apologize. To Miss Olivia and the man you accused, yeah, and maybe lay off the drinking for a while." They went back downstairs, where Olivia was waiting in the parlor. When she saw the watch in Jake's hand, relief washed over her face. After Jake made his apologies and retreated to his room, Olivia sank into a chair. "This happens more often than you'd think," she said tiredly. "Men get drunk, lose things, start fights. Some days I wonder why I do this." Thomas sat down across from her. "Because you're good at it. Because you give people a safe place to stay. Because you stand up for what's right, even when it's hard." Olivia looked at him, really looked at him, and Thomas saw something in her eyes that made his breath catch. Vulnerability, attraction, hope. Before he could act on the impulse to reach for her hand, she stood up. "It's late. You should go. Where are you staying?" "Got a room at the hotel down the street." "That place is a dump. You should stay here." "I've got one room available, better rate than the hotel." Thomas stood as well. "I don't want to cause you any trouble. You saved me trouble tonight. It's the least I can offer." She smoothed her dress, suddenly looking nervous. "Besides, it would be nice to have a boarder I can actually trust." "Then I accept. I'll get my things tomorrow." They stood there in the parlor, neither quite wanting to say goodbye. Finally, Thomas tipped his hat and headed for the door. At the threshold, he turned back. "Olivia, thank you for dinner. I'd like to do it again." "I'd like that too." Thomas walked back to the hotel through the quiet streets, his shoulder aching but his spirits high. He'd come to Fort Sumner expecting nothing more than a bath and a bed, but he was leaving with something else entirely. Hope, maybe, or the beginning of something that could become hope. The next morning, Thomas collected his few belongings and moved into the boarding house. His room was on the second floor, clean and simple, with a window overlooking the street. It was better than most places he'd stayed, and the fact that Olivia was just down the hall made it perfect. Over the next few days, Thomas found work at Henderson's ranch, helping break horses and repair fencing. The work was hard but steady, and Henderson was fair with his pay. Thomas fell into a routine: work during the day, return to the boarding house in the evening, have dinner with Olivia when she had time. They talked about everything during those dinners. Olivia told him about her childhood on the ranch, the way her mother had died when she was young, how her father had raised her to be independent and strong. Thomas shared stories from his travels, the places he'd seen, the people he'd met. They laughed together, discovered shared interests in books and horses, debated politics and religion with mutual respect. But Thomas also noticed things that worried him. The way some of the men in town looked at Olivia with disdain or worse, as if a woman running her own business was an affront to their sensibilities. The way the bank manager, a pompous man named Carlton, kept pressuring her about late payments on her loan. The exhaustion that sometimes showed through her determined facade. 3 weeks after Thomas moved in, he was sitting on the boarding house porch one evening, watching the sun set, when Olivia came out and sat beside him. She looked particularly worn down, her shoulders sagging. "Bad day?" he asked gently. "Carlton came by again. Says if I don't make a full payment by the end of the month, he'll call in the loan. I'd lose the boarding house." Her voice was flat, defeated in a way he'd never heard before. Thomas felt anger rise in his chest, not at Olivia but at the situation. "How much do you need?" $200. "I've got maybe half of that saved, but it's not enough." She shook her head. "I shouldn't be telling you this. It's not your problem." "What if I want it to be my problem?" Olivia looked at him, confused. "What do you mean?" Thomas took a deep breath. He'd been thinking about this for days now, turning it over in his mind, testing the idea from every angle. It was crazy, maybe, moving this fast. But life in the West was unpredictable. You had to grab hold of good things when they came along, because tomorrow was never guaranteed. "I've got some money saved, not a fortune but enough to help. I could loan it to you." "Thomas, I can't take your money." "Then let me invest in the boarding house, become a partner." Olivia stood up, pacing the porch. "We barely know each other." "I know enough. I know you're honest, hardworking, and one of the strongest people I've ever met. I know I trust you, and I know." He hesitated, then decided to risk everything. "I know I'm falling in love with you." She stopped pacing, turning to stare at him with wide eyes. "You can't mean that." "Why not?" "Because it's too fast. Because you're a drifter. Because this doesn't make sense." Thomas stood and walked over to her, careful not to crowd her but close enough that she could see the sincerity in his face. "Maybe it doesn't make sense by normal standards. But nothing about meeting you has been normal. You stepped in front of a bullet for me. You took me in when you didn't have to. Every day I spend around you, I see more reasons to stay. So yes, it's fast. But that doesn't make it less true." "Thomas, Olivia's voice broke slightly. "I can't let you sacrifice your savings for me." It's not a sacrifice if it's what I want, and I'm not offering just money. I'm offering partnership. In the boarding house and in life if you'll have me. Are you proposing? Not yet. I'm smart enough to know that would be too fast even for me. He managed a small smile. I'm asking for a chance, to prove I'm serious, to show you that I'm not going anywhere. Olivia was quiet for a long moment, and Thomas could see her thinking it through, weighing risks and possibilities. Finally, she said, "Let me think about it. This is a big decision. Take all the time you need." But before he could step away, she grabbed his hand, holding it tightly. "Thank you, for caring, for offering. It means more than you know." That night, Thomas lay awake in his room, wondering if he'd made a terrible mistake. Maybe he'd pushed too hard, scared her off. Maybe he should have kept his feelings to himself. But the truth was, he'd never been good at hiding what was in his heart. His mother used to say he wore his emotions on his sleeve, and the years hadn't changed that. The next morning, Olivia knocked on his door just as he was getting ready for work. She looked like she hadn't slept much either. "I've made a decision," she said without preamble. "I'll accept your offer, but we're doing this properly. We'll draw up papers, make it a legal partnership. And we're telling everyone it's just business." "What about what I said? About my feelings?" Olivia stepped into his room, closing the door behind her. "I need to be honest with you, Thomas. I'm scared. Scared of losing the boarding house, yes, but more scared of getting hurt. My father was the only family I had, and when he died, I swore I wouldn't let myself be that vulnerable again. Depending on someone, caring about them that much, the loss is just too hard. I can't promise I won't die someday. Nobody can, but I can promise I won't leave you by choice. I can promise to be honest, loyal, and to work every day to be worthy of your trust. That's what scares me, because I believe you." She took a shaky breath. "I'm falling for you too. Maybe I have been since you looked at me in that saloon like I was the bravest thing you'd ever seen. But I need time. Can you give me that?" Thomas stepped closer, reaching up to gently touch her cheek. "I'll give you whatever you need." They drew up the papers that afternoon with the town lawyer, making Thomas a legal partner in the boarding house. He contributed $150, enough with Olivia's savings to pay Carlton, and have a little extra for repairs and supplies. Carlton was clearly displeased when they made the payment, though whether because Olivia had found a way to keep her business or because Thomas was now involved, it was hard to say. Word spread quickly through Fort Sumner that Thomas Whitfield had become Olivia Winters' business partner. The reactions were mixed. Some people thought it was scandalous for an unmarried woman to be in business with an unmarried man. Others thought Thomas was a fool for investing in a boarding house when he could have used that money for his own land or cattle. But a few, the ones who knew Olivia best, were just glad she'd found someone who saw her worth. Thomas continued working at Henderson's ranch during the day, but now he came home to a place that felt truly like his. He fixed the porch steps that had been sagging, repaired the roof where it leaked in one of the guest rooms, and built a new chicken coop behind the house. Olivia watched him work with a mixture of gratitude and something warmer that she tried to hide but couldn't quite manage. They settled into a comfortable rhythm. Mornings, they'd have coffee together before Thomas left for the ranch. Evenings, they'd handle the boarding house tasks together, Olivia managing the books and meals while Thomas dealt with repairs and any troublesome guests. They'd sit together on the porch after dinner, talking or just enjoying the quiet companionship. 2 months passed this way, and Thomas felt himself growing more rooted in Fort Sumner than he'd ever been anywhere. He bought a horse from Henderson, a solid bay mare named Clover. He made friends with the blacksmith, the shopkeeper, the sheriff. He was building a life, not just passing through one, but more than anything, he was falling deeper in love with Olivia. He saw it in the little things. The way she hummed while cooking, how she checked on sick boarders with genuine concern, the fierce determination in her eyes when facing down creditors or difficult guests. She was beautiful, yes, but it was her strength and kindness that truly captivated him. Olivia was changing too, though she fought it. Thomas could see her walls coming down, bit by bit. She smiled more readily now, laughed more often. She'd started touching him casually, a hand on his arm, fingers brushing his as they passed dishes at dinner. Small things, but they spoke volumes. The moment everything shifted happened on a warm September afternoon. Thomas had come home early from the ranch, Henderson having given him the rest of the day off after they'd finished a big project. He found Olivia in the kitchen, making bread, flour dusting her hands and apron. She looked up when he entered, surprise and pleasure crossing her face. "You're home early. Finished the new barn. Henderson said to take the rest of the day." Thomas leaned against the door frame, watching her work. "Need help? You know how to make bread. My mother taught me. Said a man should know how to feed himself. Smart woman." They worked side by side, kneading dough, shaping loaves. At one point, Olivia got flour on her nose and Thomas reached over to brush it off. The moment his fingers touched her skin, the air between them changed, charged with something electric. Olivia looked up at him, and Thomas saw his own longing reflected in her eyes. "Thomas," she whispered. He leaned in slowly, giving her every chance to pull away. When she didn't, when instead she rose on her toes to meet him halfway, he kissed her. It was gentle at first, tentative, both of them afraid of moving too fast. But then Olivia's arms came around his neck, and Thomas pulled her closer, and the kiss deepened into something more. When they finally pulled apart, both breathless, Olivia rested her forehead against his chest. "I tried so hard not to do this. I know. I'm still scared. I know that too." Thomas ran his hand through her hair, marveling at how perfectly she fit against him. "But maybe scared is okay. Maybe we can be scared together." Olivia looked up at him, tears shining in her eyes. "I love you. I think I have for a while now, but I was too afraid to admit it. I love you too. Have since the moment you stepped in front of that bullet." They kissed again, and this time there was no hesitation, just joy and relief and the certainty that they'd found something rare and precious. When they heard footsteps on the front porch, they pulled apart reluctantly, both grinning like fools. Over the next few weeks, Thomas and Olivia's relationship became public knowledge. They didn't hide their feelings anymore, holding hands while walking through town, sitting close during meals at the boarding house. Some people gossiped, but most were supportive. It was hard not to be, seeing how happy they made each other. Thomas knew he wanted to marry her. The question was when and how to ask. He wanted it to be special, meaningful. He thought about elaborate proposals, romantic gestures. But every idea felt wrong, too fancy for what they had, which was simple and honest and real. The answer came to him one evening in late October. They were hosting a dinner at the boarding house for all the regular boarders, a tradition Olivia had started to make the place feel more like a community. Everyone was gathered around the big table, passing dishes and sharing stories. It was warm and loud and full of life. After dinner, as people lingered over coffee and pie, Thomas stood up. The room gradually quieted as people noticed, curious about what he had to say. "I just want to say thank you," Thomas began, feeling uncharacteristically nervous. "To all of you for making me feel welcome here. I came to Fort Sumner as a drifter, not expecting to stay. But this place, and especially Olivia, have given me something I didn't know I was missing. A home." Some of the boarders smiled, nodding. Olivia was watching him with a puzzled expression, not sure where this was going. Thomas turned to face her directly. "Olivia, I'm not good with fancy words. I don't have much to offer except hard work, honesty, and a heart that's completely yours. But I love you more than I knew it was possible to love someone. You make me want to be better, do better. So I'm asking, right here in front of everyone, will you marry me?" The room erupted in various reactions. Some boarders cheered, others gasped. But a few, the ones who'd been drinking earlier, started laughing. Not cruel laughter exactly, but the kind of chuckling that comes from surprise and discomfort. "That's it," one man called out. "No ring, no getting down on one knee, pretty simple proposal." Another added, though not unkindly. Thomas felt his face heat up, embarrassment washing over him. Maybe he should have done something more traditional, more impressive. But before he could respond, before he could try to salvage the moment, he saw Olivia's face. She was crying. Tears streamed down her cheeks, but she was smiling at the same time, the most radiant smile Thomas had ever seen. She stood up, walked around the table to him, and took his hands in hers. "It's perfect," she said, her voice thick with emotion. "It's the most honest thing anyone has ever said to me. No games, no pretense, just you telling the truth in front of everyone. Thomas Whitfield, yes. Yes, I'll marry you." The room erupted again, this time in genuine celebration. Boarders clapped and whistled, offering congratulations, but Thomas barely heard them. He was too focused on Olivia, on the joy in her face, the love in her eyes. He pulled her into his arms and kissed her, not caring who was watching. When they finally pulled apart, one of the boarders, an older woman named Martha, came over and hugged them both. "Don't listen to those fools laughing. What you two have is special. Real love doesn't need fancy trappings." "Thank you, Martha," Olivia said, wiping her tears. The party continued long into the night, but eventually the boarders drifted off to their rooms or out to the town saloons. Thomas and Olivia were left alone on the porch, sitting close together on the bench, her head on his shoulder. "Why were you crying?" Thomas asked softly. Olivia was quiet for a moment, then said, "Because I've spent so much of my life being strong, never showing weakness, never letting anyone too close. And you just stood there, vulnerable in front of everyone, and said exactly how you felt. No pride, no posturing, just honesty. It was the bravest thing I've ever seen. I meant every word. I know, that's why I cried." She lifted her head to look at him. "When do you want to get married? Tomorrow, if you'd have me that soon." Olivia laughed. "Let's give it a few weeks. I want to make a nice dress, and we should invite people properly. As long as I end up your husband, I don't care about the details." They set the date for the first Saturday in December, giving them about 6 weeks to prepare. It wasn't a long engagement, but they didn't need it. They'd already made their choice, already committed their hearts. The wedding was just making it official. The preparations kept them busy. Olivia sewed her dress with help from Martha and a few other women in town. Thomas arranged for the ceremony to be held at the small church on the edge of Fort Sumner, and for a reception afterward at the boarding house. They sent word to Thomas's trail boss and the men from the cattle drive who were still in the area. Olivia had no family to invite, but half the town ended up planning to attend anyway. During this time, Thomas noticed Carlton, the bank manager, giving them suspicious looks whenever they came to town. One afternoon, Carlton cornered Thomas outside the general store. "You think you're clever, don't you?" Carlton said, his face red with anger. "I'm sorry," Thomas replied, genuinely confused, swooping in, taking advantage of Olivia, getting your hands on her property. Thomas felt anger rise in his chest, but he kept his voice level. "I'm marrying Olivia because I love her. The boarding house has nothing to do with it. A likely story. A drifter like you, suddenly wanting to settle down. You saw an opportunity and took it. What I saw was an incredible woman who deserved better than the way this town treated her." Better than you trying to take her livelihood because she fell behind on a few payments. Carlton stepped closer, lowering his voice. Watch yourself, Whitfield. I have influence in this town. I could make things difficult for you and your bride. You could try. But Olivia's paid up on her loan now, and we've got a legally binding partnership. There's nothing you can do. Thomas met Carlton's gaze steadily. And if you try to hurt her in any way, you'll answer to me. He walked away before Carlton could respond, his hands shaking slightly from the confrontation. He hated conflict, but he'd stand up to anyone who threatened Olivia. She was his future, his home, his heart. When he told Olivia about the encounter that evening, she sighed heavily. Carlton's been a problem since I took over the boarding house. He never thought a woman should be in business. Probably hoped I'd fail so he could foreclose and sell the property to one of his friends. Well, he'll have to live with disappointment. Olivia kissed his cheek. My hero. I'm not a hero, just a man who loves you. Same thing to me. The weeks passed quickly, filled with work and preparations and stolen moments of happiness. Thomas continued at Henderson's ranch, but Henderson had offered him a permanent position as foreman, which he'd accepted. It was steady work with good pay, and it meant he could provide for Olivia properly. The night before the wedding, tradition dictated they shouldn't see each other. Thomas stayed at the ranch with Henderson, who'd become a good friend. They sat by the fire, sharing a bottle of whiskey. Nervous? Henderson asked. About marrying Olivia, not even a little, about being a good husband, terrified. Henderson laughed. That's how you know you're ready. The ones who aren't nervous are the ones who don't take it seriously enough. He took a sip of whiskey. But you and Olivia, you'll be fine. I've seen how you are together. That's the real thing. I hope so. I want to make her happy. Then you will. It's that simple and that complicated. Thomas didn't sleep much that night, too excited and anxious about the next day. When morning came, he washed, shaved, and put on the new suit he'd bought for the occasion. It was simple but well made, dark blue with a white shirt. He looked at himself in the mirror and barely recognized the man staring back. He looked settled, respectable, happy. The church was small but packed when Thomas arrived. It seemed like half of Fort Sumner had shown up, along with several men from the Trail Drive and Henderson and his family. Thomas took his place at the front with the preacher, a kindly older man named Reverend Walsh. When Olivia appeared at the back of the church, Thomas forgot to breathe. She wore a dress of deep cream-colored fabric, simple in design but elegant. Her hair was pinned up with small flowers woven through it. She looked beautiful, but more than that, she looked radiantly happy. She walked down the aisle alone, no one to give her away, but she didn't need anyone. She was giving herself, making this choice freely. When she reached Thomas and took his hands, he saw tears in her eyes again, but these were purely joyful. The ceremony was short and sweet. They said their vows, promised to love and honor each other for all their days. When Reverend Walsh pronounced them husband and wife, Thomas kissed Olivia with all the love in his heart, and the church erupted in applause. The reception at the boarding house was lively and warm. People ate, drank, danced, and celebrated. Thomas and Olivia moved through the crowd together, accepting congratulations, thanking guests for coming. At one point, Martha pulled Olivia aside and Thomas saw them talking, saw Martha press something into Olivia's hand. Later, Olivia showed him a beautiful old brooch that had belonged to Martha's mother. She said it was for luck, Olivia explained, tears threatening again. You cry a lot for a tough woman, Thomas teased gently. Only around you. You make me feel safe enough to. As the evening wore on and guests began to leave, Thomas and Olivia finally found themselves alone. They went upstairs to their room, the same one Thomas had been staying in but which they'd now share as husband and wife. Olivia had added feminine touches, Curtains on the windows, a quilt on the bed, flowers in a vase. "Hello, Mrs. Whitfield," Thomas said softly, closing the door behind them. "Hello, Mr. Whitfield." Olivia stepped into his arms, resting her head against his chest. "We did it. We did. And I promise you, I'm going to spend every day trying to be worthy of you. You already are." They stood there for a long moment, just holding each other, feeling the weight and wonder of the commitment they'd made. Then Olivia looked up at him, and Thomas saw love and desire and trust in her eyes. He kissed her, and she kissed him back, and the rest of the world fell away. Their first year of marriage was hard work, but deeply satisfying. They ran the boarding house together, building a reputation for cleanliness, good food, and fair prices. Thomas's income from the ranch supplemented the boarding house earnings, and they were able to save a little money each month. More than financial stability, though, they had each other. Thomas learned Olivia's moods and quirks, how she liked her coffee in the morning, the way she hummed when she was content, her tendency to worry late at night about things beyond her control. Olivia learned Thomas's habits too, his early morning routines, his careful way of thinking through problems, the way he'd sometimes grow quiet and melancholy thinking about his parents. They had disagreements, of course. Thomas thought Olivia was too lenient with boarders who were late on rent. Olivia thought Thomas worked too hard at the ranch, pushing himself when he should rest. But they learned to talk through their differences, to compromise, to put their relationship above pride or stubbornness. In the spring of 1879, Olivia told Thomas she was pregnant. He'd been mending a fence behind the boarding house when she came out, her face a mixture of joy and nervousness. "Thomas, I need to tell you something." He put down his tools immediately, hearing the seriousness in her tone. "What's wrong?" "Nothing's wrong. At least, I hope not. I'm going to have a baby." For a moment, Thomas just stared at her, processing the words. Then joy exploded through him like fireworks. He let out a whoop, picked Olivia up, and spun her around. She laughed, holding on to him. "I take it you're happy?" she asked when he set her down. "Happy." "Olivia, I'm over the moon. We're going to be parents." He pulled her close, suddenly feeling overwhelmed. "I'm terrified too. What if I'm not a good father? You'll be wonderful. You're kind, patient, honest, everything a child needs." "When?" "October, I think. Maybe late September." Thomas kissed her tenderly. "I love you so much, and I already love this baby." They told the boarders that evening, and the news was met with excitement and congratulations. Martha immediately started knitting baby clothes. The men started laying bets on whether it would be a boy or girl. The boarding house felt even more like a family. As Olivia's pregnancy progressed, Thomas became fiercely protective. He insisted on taking over the heavier chores, wouldn't let her lift anything heavy, worried constantly about her health. Olivia tolerated it with good humor, though she occasionally had to remind him she was pregnant, not fragile. "Women have been having babies since the beginning of time," she told him one evening when he tried to stop her from carrying a laundry basket. "I'm not going to break. I know. But you're precious to me. I can't help but worry." She softened at that. "I know, and I love you for it, but I also need to keep living my life." They found a balance, Thomas helping without hovering, Olivia accepting help without feeling smothered. As summer gave way to fall, they prepared a nursery in the small room next to theirs. Thomas built a cradle with his own hands, carving little horses into the headboard. Olivia sewed blankets and baby clothes, humming as she worked. On a crisp October morning, Olivia woke Thomas before dawn, gripping his hand tightly. "It's time." Thomas's heart leaped into his throat. He scrambled out of bed, throwing on clothes. "I'll get the doctor. And Martha. I want Martha here too." Thomas ran through the quiet streets, pounding on the doctor's door, then on Martha's. Within half an hour, they were all at the boarding house, Martha boiling water and gathering towels while the doctor examined Olivia. "First babies take a while," the doctor said calmly. "Could be hours yet." It was indeed hours. Long, agonizing hours where Thomas paced the hallway outside their room, listening to Olivia's labored breathing and occasional cries of pain. Every sound tore at him. He wanted to be in there with her, but Martha had gently but firmly told him that birthing rooms were no place for husbands. Henderson stopped by around midday, having heard the news. He sat with Thomas, offering silent support. Other boarders hovered anxiously, bringing Thomas food he couldn't eat, coffee he barely tasted. Finally, as the sun was setting, Thomas heard a different sound, the sharp, lusty cry of a newborn. His heart nearly stopped. He waited, hardly breathing, until Martha opened the door, smiling broadly. "You have a son, and Olivia's fine. Tired, but fine." Thomas rushed into the room. Olivia lay in bed, exhausted but radiant, holding a small bundle wrapped in blankets. She looked up at him with tears streaming down her face. "Thomas, meet your son." Thomas approached almost reverently, looking down at the tiny red face peeking out from the blankets. The baby had stopped crying, his dark eyes seeming to look around with vague curiosity. Thomas felt something shift in his chest, a love so immediate and overwhelming he could barely breathe. "He's perfect," Thomas whispered. "You're perfect. Olivia, you're amazing." "We should name him," Olivia said softly. "What do you think of Samuel, after my father? Samuel Whitfield, I love it." Thomas carefully sat on the edge of the bed, putting an arm around Olivia's shoulders, gazing at their son. "Hello, Samuel. I'm your papa, and I promise you I'm going to do everything I can to be the father you deserve." Samuel made a small sound like a sigh and nestled closer to Olivia. Thomas felt tears on his own cheeks now, happiness too big to contain. The next few months were exhausting but wonderful. Samuel was a good baby, relatively calm, though he woke often at night to nurse. Thomas and Olivia took turns walking him when he was fussy, singing lullabies, marveling at every small change and development. The boarding house adapted to having a baby in residence. The boarders were surprisingly gentle and helpful, taking turns watching Samuel when Thomas and Olivia needed rest, making silly faces to get him to smile. The boarding house felt less like a business and more like a real home. One evening in early December, when Samuel was about 2 months old, Thomas came home from the ranch to find Olivia crying in the kitchen. Not the happy tears he'd grown used to, but deep, wrenching sobs. He immediately went to her, alarmed. "What's wrong?" "Is Samuel okay?" "He's fine." "He's sleeping." Olivia wiped her face, trying to compose herself. "I'm being foolish. Tell me." Thomas pulled her into his arms. "I was just thinking about my father, wishing he could meet Samuel. He would have loved being a grandfather." Her voice broke. "Some days I miss him so much I can barely breathe." Thomas held her tighter, letting her cry. He understood that grief didn't follow a schedule, that sometimes it ambushed you when you least expected it. "I know he'd be proud of you, of everything you've built, the mother you are. And Samuel will know his grandfather through your stories. Will you tell him about your parents too? Of course. They may all be gone, but their love lives on in us. And now in Samuel." They stood there in the kitchen, holding each other, sharing grief and comfort in equal measure. It was one of those moments that defined their marriage. Not just the happy times, but the ability to be vulnerable together, to support each other through pain. As Samuel grew from an infant to a toddler, the boarding house continued to thrive. They'd paid off the loan to Carlton's bank and were even making improvements. Fresh paint, new furniture, a larger kitchen. Thomas had been promoted to foreman at Henderson's ranch, with a corresponding increase in pay. They were comfortable, not wealthy, but secure in a way neither had been before they found each other. Samuel took his first steps on a warm spring day in 1881, tottering from Olivia to Thomas across the parlor while several boarders watched and cheered. He was a happy child, quick to laugh, curious about everything. He loved animals, especially the horses at Henderson's ranch, and Thomas would often take him to work, letting him sit on the fence and watch the horses. One afternoon, when Samuel was napping and the boarding house was quiet, Olivia and Thomas sat on their favorite spot on the porch. She leaned against him contentedly. "You ever think about how we met?" she asked. "Sometimes. Usually when I'm thanking my lucky stars that Marcus was such a bad shot." Olivia laughed. "If someone had told me that day that the man bleeding in my saloon would become my husband, I would have thought they were crazy. And yet here we are. Here we are." She paused, then said, "Thomas, I want you to know something. That night you proposed, when those men laughed, I was angry at first. Angry that they didn't see how beautiful and perfect your words were. But then I realized it didn't matter what they thought. What mattered was that you meant every word. You gave me honesty instead of empty romantic gestures, and that meant more than any fancy proposal ever could." Thomas kissed the top of her head. "You gave me a home, a family, a purpose. I was drifting before you, Olivia, lost without knowing it. You saved me. We saved each other." They sat in comfortable silence, watching the sun set over Fort Sumner, their son sleeping peacefully inside, their life stretching out before them full of possibility and promise. 2 more children came in the following years. A daughter, Emily, in 1883, and another son, James, in 1885. The boarding house grew more crowded and chaotic, but also more full of life and love. Samuel was a natural big brother, protective and patient with his younger siblings. Emily was fearless and adventurous, constantly getting into mischief. James was quiet and thoughtful, content to sit and watch the world around him. Thomas and Olivia grew older together, weathering the challenges that life brought. Droughts that affected the ranch's income, boarders who couldn't pay and had to be evicted, childhood illnesses that had them praying through long nights. But they also celebrated triumphs. Samuel's first day of school, Emily's beautiful singing voice, James's talent for drawing, the year they finally owned the boarding house outright with no debt. Through it all, their love deepened and matured. The passionate fire of their early days mellowed into something steadier, but no less profound. A partnership built on trust, respect, and genuine affection. They still had their moments of romance, stolen kisses in the pantry, hands held under the dinner table, nights when they'd leave the children with Martha and walk out under the stars. On their 10th wedding anniversary in December of 1889, Thomas surprised Olivia with a gift. It was a small thing, just a simple gold band to go with her wedding ring, but engraved on the inside were the words, "Still the most honest thing." Olivia cried when she read it, of course. Happy tears. "You remembered," she whispered. "I remember everything about that night. How terrified I was that you'd say no. How beautiful you looked. The way those men laughed." Thomas took her hand, sliding the new ring onto her finger. "But most of all, I remember you crying and telling me it was the most honest thing anyone had ever said to you. That's what I wanted our marriage to be built on. Honesty, always. And it has been. Thomas, you've given me everything I never knew I wanted, not just the children and the home, but yourself. Your complete, honest self." They kissed, not with the urgency of new love, but with the depth of a decade's worth of shared experiences, joys and sorrows, triumphs and failures, all woven together into something unbreakable. The 1890s brought changes to Fort Sumner and to their lives. The wild frontier was slowly being tamed. More families moved to the area. A school was built. The town grew and modernized. The boarding house evolved too, attracting fewer rough cowboys and more families passing through, salesmen, even the occasional tourist wanting to see the West. Thomas eventually left Henderson's ranch to focus full-time on the boarding house, which had grown enough to need his constant attention. They'd expanded, buying the property next door and knocking through walls to create more rooms. It was ambitious, requiring a loan from a different bank, Carlton having retired and moved away, but it paid off. The Whitfield boarding house, as it became known, developed a reputation as one of the best establishments in the territory. Their children grew up surrounded by the diverse characters who passed through the boarding house: merchants and lawmen, farmers and soldiers, widows and orphans. Samuel developed his father's calm temperament and his mother's business sense. Emily inherited Olivia's fierce independence and Thomas's kind heart. James was creative and sensitive, always drawing or writing stories. One evening in 1895, when Samuel was 16, Emily 12, and James 10, the whole family was sitting around the dinner table. Samuel had just announced he wanted to go to college in the East, study business formally. "That's wonderful, son," Thomas said, though his heart ached at the thought of Samuel leaving. "We'll find a way to manage the cost. I can work during summers, send money back," Samuel offered. "We'll figure it out together," Olivia said firmly. "Education is important. Your grandfather believed that, and so do we." After the children went to bed, Thomas and Olivia sat on the porch, their usual evening ritual. Thomas was quiet, and Olivia could tell something was bothering him. "What is it?" she asked gently. "I'm proud of Samuel, excited for him, but also feeling old. When did our children grow up enough to leave us?" Olivia took his hand. "We raised them to be independent, to chase their dreams. That was always the goal, I know. Doesn't make it easier, though." "No, it doesn't. But Thomas, look at what we've built. Not just this boarding house, but our children, our life together. Your simple proposal turned into all of this." Thomas laughed softly. "You still think about that all the time?" "Especially when the children ask how we met, how you proposed. I tell them the whole story. How you stood up in front of everyone and spoke from your heart, and how some people laughed. But then I tell them that the best things in life are often simple and honest, not elaborate and false." "What do they say?" "Emily says she wants someone to propose to her just like that someday. Samuel says he hopes he has the courage to be that honest when he falls in love. And James just smiles and probably stores it away for one of his stories." Thomas pulled Olivia close. "I love you, Olivia Whitfield, just as much today as I did that night in the dining room, probably more. More, because now I know every piece of you. Your strength and your vulnerability, your humor and your occasional stubbornness, the way you love our children so fiercely it sometimes scares you. I love all of it, all of you." Olivia rested her head on his shoulder. "I love you too. Thank you for being patient with me all those years ago when I was too scared to let you in. Thank you for your honesty, your faithfulness, your love. You've made my life so much richer than I ever imagined it could be." They sat there as the stars came out, comfortable in the silence, secure in their love, grateful for every moment that had led them here. Samuel did go east for college, leaving in the fall of 1896. It was hard on everyone, especially Olivia, but they were proud of him. He wrote letters home regularly, full of his classes, his new friends, his plans for the future. He wanted to come back to Fort Sumner eventually, help expand the family business even further. Emily, at 15, was courting a young man named Daniel, son of the town's new doctor. Thomas wasn't entirely comfortable with his daughter growing up, but Daniel was respectful and clearly smitten. Olivia reminded Thomas that he'd been not much older when he fell in love with her. James was developing into quite the artist, his drawings and paintings earning praise from everyone who saw them. There was talk of sending him to art school someday, though he was still young enough that such decisions were years away. In 1898, when Thomas was 48 and Olivia 43, they celebrated their 20th wedding anniversary. Their children, boarders, and friends threw them a surprise party at the boarding house. The place was decorated with flowers and ribbons, a huge meal prepared, music and dancing. At one point during the evening, Henderson, now an old man but still sharp, stood up and called for everyone's attention. "I want to say something about Thomas and Olivia," he announced. "I've known Thomas for 20 years now. He came here as a drifter, no real plans, no real home. But he had something special in him, an honest heart. When he met Olivia, that honesty is what won her over. Not grand gestures or empty promises, just the simple truth of his feelings. And look at what that honesty built. A marriage that stood strong for 20 years. A family. A business. A real contribution to this community. So here's to Thomas and Olivia, and to the power of speaking simple truth." Everyone raised their glasses, cheering. Thomas looked at Olivia, saw tears streaming down her face yet again, and laughed. "You're going to cry at our 50th anniversary too, aren't you?" he teased. "Absolutely," she replied, laughing through her tears. The new century arrived, bringing with it more changes. Automobiles started appearing on the streets, though most people still relied on horses. Electricity came to Fort Sumner, and the boarding house was one of the first buildings to be wired. The telephone became common, and they had one installed for business purposes. Samuel graduated from college and returned home in 1901, full of ideas for modernizing the boarding house. With his business education and his parents' practical experience, they transformed the place into something between a boarding house and a small hotel. They added private bathrooms to some rooms, upgraded the kitchen, installed electric lighting throughout. Emily married Daniel in a beautiful ceremony in 1902, and Thomas cried as he walked his daughter down the aisle, remembering the tiny baby she'd once been. They settled in Fort Sumner, Daniel joining his father's medical practice, and within a year, Emily announced she was pregnant. Thomas and Olivia were going to be grandparents. James won a scholarship to an art school in Santa Fe, leaving in 1903. He promised to come home for holidays, and he did, always bringing new paintings to decorate the boarding house walls. The first grandchild, a girl named Anna, arrived in December of 1903. Thomas held the tiny baby in his arms and felt the circle of life continuing. His own children were grown, starting families of their own. It was bittersweet but beautiful. More grandchildren followed over the years. Emily and Daniel had 3 more children. Samuel eventually married a teacher named Clara, and they had 2 children. Even James, the artistic one, eventually found love with a fellow artist and married, though they chose to remain childless, dedicating themselves to their art. Through all these changes, Thomas and Olivia remained the steady center. They were older now, their hair more gray than not, their movements a bit slower, but their love as strong as ever. They still ran the boarding house together, though Samuel had taken over most of the day-to-day operations. They still sat on the porch each evening, still held hands, still found reasons to laugh together. On a warm evening in June of 1915, Thomas and Olivia sat on their porch, surrounded by family. It was Samuel's 36th birthday, and everyone had gathered for a celebration. Children ran through the yard, grandchildren ranging from babies to pre-teens. Emily and Daniel were there with their family, James and his wife had come up from Santa Fe. The boarding house, now properly a hotel, was full of life and love. As the sun set and the party wound down, Thomas pulled Olivia aside. "Walk with me." They strolled away from the house, down the street, past buildings they'd seen go up over the decades. They walked slowly, Thomas's knees bothering him more than they used to, until they reached the old saloon where they'd first met. It was a restaurant now, completely renovated, barely recognizable. "Hard to believe it all started here," Olivia said softly. "One bullet, one decision to step in front of it, and everything changed. You ever regret it? Tying yourself to a simple cowboy instead of someone more sophisticated?" Olivia turned to him, cupping his weathered face in her hands. "Thomas Whitfield, you are the best decision I ever made. You gave me everything: love, family, partnership, a life beyond what I dreamed possible. And it all came from your beautiful, simple honesty. I've never regretted a single moment. Even when I proposed in front of everyone and they laughed, especially then. Because that's when I knew for certain that you were real, that your love was real. No pretense, no games, just truth." She kissed him softly. "I love you, Thomas. I've loved you for 37 years, and I'll love you until my last breath. And I love you. Always have, always will." They stood there on the street where their story began, old now but no less in love than they'd been at the start. Around them, Fort Sumner had grown and changed, evolved from a rough frontier town to a modern community. But some things remained constant: the desert sky, the warm breeze, and the love between Thomas and Olivia Whitfield. They walked back to the boarding house hand in hand, greeted by the sounds of their grandchildren playing, their children laughing, the family they'd built together. Inside, Olivia went to the kitchen to help with dessert, and Thomas was pulled into a game by the youngest grandchildren. Later that night, after everyone had gone home and the hotel guests had retired to their rooms, Thomas and Olivia prepared for bed. It was a routine they'd perfected over decades, Olivia brushing out her long gray hair while Thomas sat on the edge of the bed removing his boots. "Thomas," Olivia said softly. "Yes. Thank you for asking me to marry you. Thank you for your simple, honest proposal. Thank you for every day since." Thomas crossed the room and took her hand, pulling her close. "Thank you for saying yes. Thank you for taking a chance on a drifter with nothing but love to offer." They climbed into bed together, fitting against each other the way they had for decades. Outside, Fort Sumner slept peacefully under a canopy of stars. Inside, in a boarding house turned hotel, surrounded by memories of a life well lived, Thomas and Olivia Whitfield held each other close and drifted off to sleep, secure in the knowledge that simple honesty had built them something extraordinary. Years continued to pass, bringing both joys and sorrows as they do for everyone. Thomas and Olivia celebrated their 40th, then 45th, then 50th wedding anniversary. They watched their grandchildren grow up, saw some of them marry and have children of their own, making them great-grandparents. The hotel continued to thrive under Samuel's management, becoming a landmark in Fort Sumner. There were losses, too. Martha passed away peacefully in her sleep in 1918, and they mourned the woman who'd been like a mother to them both. Henderson followed a year later, and Thomas attended the funeral remembering the man who'd given him his first real job in Fort Sumner, who'd become his friend. But through it all, Thomas and Olivia had each other. They moved a bit slower now, couldn't do as much physical work, but they were still partners in every sense. They still took their evening walks when weather permitted, still sat on the porch together, still found ways to make each other laugh. In the spring of 1925, Thomas fell ill. It started as what seemed like a simple cold but developed into pneumonia. At 75, his body struggled to fight off the infection. Olivia never left his side, sitting by his bed day and night, holding his hand, talking to him even when he was too weak to respond. Their children gathered, sensing the end was near. Samuel brought his whole family. Emily came with Daniel, who as a doctor confirmed what they all feared. Thomas was fading. James arrived from Santa Fe, setting aside his work to be with his father. On a quiet evening in early April with his family surrounding him, Thomas opened his eyes. They were cloudy with age and illness, but they found Olivia immediately, focusing on her with the same love he'd always shown. "Olivia," he whispered, his voice barely audible. She leaned close, tears streaming down her face. "I'm here, my love, I'm right here. Best decision, marrying you. Best decision I ever made was saying yes." Thomas smiled weakly. "Not fancy, but honest. The most honest thing ever said. I've never forgotten that night, Thomas. Never stopped being grateful for your simple, perfect proposal." He squeezed her hand with what little strength he had left. "Love you, always. I love you too, so much." Olivia kissed his forehead, his cheeks, his lips. "Thank you for 46 beautiful years. Thank you for being exactly who you were, honest and true and good." Thomas's eyes closed, a peaceful expression on his face. His breathing grew shallower, slower. Surrounded by the family they'd created, held by the woman he'd loved more than life itself, Thomas Whitfield took his last breath. The grief was overwhelming. Olivia felt like part of her soul had been ripped away. For 46 years, Thomas had been her partner, her love, her best friend. The bed felt too big without him, the hotel too quiet, the world too empty. But she wasn't alone. Her children rallied around her, taking turns staying with her, making sure she ate, getting her out of bed each day. Her grandchildren and great-grandchildren came by constantly, filling the hotel with life and noise, and reminders that Thomas's legacy lived on. The funeral was held at the church where they'd been married, and it seemed like all of Fort Sumner attended. Person after person stood up to share stories about Thomas, his kindness, his fairness, his quiet strength. Henderson's son spoke about how Thomas had been like a second father to him. Former hotel guests wrote letters telling how Thomas had made them feel welcome and safe. The sheriff talked about Thomas's integrity, how he'd been someone the whole community respected and trusted. But it was Samuel who gave the eulogy that truly captured who Thomas had been. "My father," Samuel said, his voice strong despite his grief, "was not a complicated man. He believed in hard work, honest dealings, and simple love. When he asked my mother to marry him, he didn't make grand speeches or empty promises. He just told her the truth, that he loved her, that he'd work hard to be worthy of her, that his heart was hers. Some people laughed at how simple it was. But my mother cried because it was the most honest thing anyone had ever said to her. That honesty, that simplicity, that truth was the foundation of their marriage and our family. My father taught us that you don't need fancy words to express real feelings. You just need courage to be honest." He lived that way every day of his life, and he's left us all a better legacy because of it. Olivia sat in the front pew, surrounded by her children, and cried for the man who changed her life with his simple honesty. After the funeral, life slowly found a new normal. Olivia continued living in the hotel. Though she no longer ran it, that duty firmly in Samuel's capable hands. She spent her days with her grandchildren, working in the small garden Thomas had planted for her years ago, and sitting on the porch each evening remembering all the times she and Thomas had sat there together. She lived for another 8 years, long enough to see more great-grandchildren born, to see the hotel expand even further, to witness Fort Sumner continue to grow and modernize. She told stories about Thomas to anyone who would listen, keeping his memory alive, making sure future generations knew about the good man who'd built this family with simple, honest love. Olivia Whitfield passed away peacefully in her sleep in October of 1933 at the age of 88. She was buried next to Thomas, their graves side by side under a cottonwood tree in the Fort Sumner Cemetery. The headstone was simple, just their names and dates with one line beneath, built on honest love. The hotel remained in the family for generations, eventually being renamed the Whitfield Hotel in honor of its founders. In the lobby, prominently displayed, hung a painting James had done of his parents. It showed them sitting on the porch of the boarding house, Thomas's arm around Olivia's shoulders, both of them smiling. Beneath the painting was a small plaque that told their story, how they met when Olivia stepped in front of a bullet to save Thomas, how he proposed to her in front of everyone with simple, honest words that some laughed at but made her cry, how they built a life together based on truth, hard work, and genuine love. Tourists would sometimes stop to read the plaque and look at the painting. They'd smile at the romantic story, at the idea of such simple, honest love lasting nearly half a century. Some would mention it was old-fashioned, that modern proposals needed to be more elaborate. But the Whitfield descendants knew better. They'd inherited not just a successful hotel but a legacy of honesty, integrity, and the courage to speak simple truths. They'd seen how that foundation had created strong marriages, raised good children, built a family that supported each other through generations. Samuel's great-grandson, another Thomas Whitfield, took over running the hotel in 1975. By then, it had been modernized extensively with air conditioning, televisions in rooms, a restaurant attached. But young Thomas kept the painting in the lobby, kept the story alive. When he got married in 1978 to a woman named Sarah, he proposed to her simply, without elaborate plans or grand gestures. They were having dinner at home, and he just took her hand and told her honestly that he loved her, wanted to spend his life with her, and hoped she felt the same way. Sarah had heard the family story, knew about the original Thomas and Olivia. When her Thomas proposed so simply and honestly, she understood what he was doing, honoring his ancestors while speaking his own truth. She cried as she said yes, moved by the honesty of the moment. Was that too simple? Thomas asked, worried by her tears. It was perfect, Sarah replied. The most honest thing anyone's ever said to me. And so the legacy continued, generation after generation, each one learning that real love doesn't need elaborate words or grand gestures. It just needs honesty, commitment, and the courage to speak simple truths from the heart. The Whitfield Hotel still stands in Fort Sumner, New Mexico, a testament to what two people built together, starting with one honest proposal and nearly 50 years of dedicated partnership. The town has changed dramatically since 1878, growing and modernizing, but the hotel remains, a piece of living history, a reminder that some things, simple, honest love, never go out of style. And in the lobby, the painting still hangs, showing Thomas and Olivia Whitfield in their prime, happy and together. Visitors still stop to read the plaque, still smile at the story. Some still think a proposal needs to be more elaborate. But those who understand, those who have experienced real love themselves, know the truth. That sometimes the most meaningful words are the simplest ones. That honesty will always matter more than elaborate displays. That a man standing up in front of everyone and simply, truthfully declaring his love might be laughed at by some, but will bring tears of joy to the one person who matters most. Thomas and Olivia Whitfield's story ended, as all stories must, but their legacy lived on. In their descendants, in the hotel they built, in the town they helped shape, and most importantly, in the example they set of what real, lasting love looks like. Not perfect, not always easy, but always honest, always committed, always real. The simple proposal that some laughed at became the foundation of something extraordinary. And Olivia's tears, shed because it was the most honest thing ever said to her, watered the seeds of a love that bloomed for nearly half a century and continues to inspire generations later. That is the power of honest words, honestly spoken by honest hearts.